stand?
I think this project has been doomed from the start. I think it has been run badly. And I think now we're clutching at straws. The price is going to go up and up.
And a new Treasury Minister is calling for a dramatic rethink of High Speed 2 rail project. Is it too late for a U-turn? They've already spent £65 million. Well, that voice you heard was Cheryl Gillen, who was the Secretary of State for Wales until she was sacked in the reshuffle. She is a leading opponent of the high-speed rail link, not least because it's going to cut right through her constituency. Well, imagine the surprise of the Prime Minister and the Chancellor of the Exchequer and the Transport Secretary when they look at today's front page of the Daily Telegraph. Headline, Treasury Minister's battle to scrap HS2. David Cameron's new Treasury Minister has called for a, quote, dramatic rethink. Andrea Leadsom has warned that the £50 billion scheme does not represent value for taxpayers' money. She says the economic case for the rail line was questionable and deteriorating, and she said she promises to fight against it. Before she became a minister, she sent a series of letters to rail executives saying that the line would cause severe and irreversible damage to wildlife habitats, heritage sites and areas of natural beauty. But her warning over the economic justification for the project will be particularly damaging, coming from a Treasury Minister widely respected for her economic expertise, and she's only been in the government a matter of weeks. She took her job in the Treasury when Sajid Javid was promoted to the Cabinet to replace Maria Miller. Do you remember Maria Miller? She was the Cabinet Minister who forgot about her expenses and had to repay £6,000. So here's the question. Is this woman right? Should we call a halt to this project? It's probably one of the biggest infrastructure projects that this country's ever seen. £50 billion, and it'll be cost more than that. You know that. There's still time to stop it. They've spent £65 million. Last week I reported in my newspaper, the Daily Mail, that the Transport Secretary has just hired 8 advisors at a cost of £35,000 each. Well, if it's scrapped after the election, they won't be long for that job. Do you think it should be scrapped right now? Well, let's talk to two people with very differing views on this. For HS2 is Geoff Inskip. He's the Chief Executive of Centro, which is the Transport Authority for the West Midlands. And against is Richard Houghton from the HS2 Action Alliance. Geoff Inskip, if I can ask you first, what do you make of this surprising intervention by a Treasury Minister?
I think this is the last throw of the dice for the opposition, really. The second reading takes place on next week, and once that second reading takes place, then really we're just into the details. So the principles now agreed by government on the first reading. This is the last vestiges of people trying to sort of say, let's try and stop it now. These people have always been against it, and despite the fact that there is an extremely strong case for high speed 2 in terms of the capacity we need on the railways and in terms of the economic rebalancing the economy that will bring, these arguments, there are some people who just don't want to listen to those arguments and rather focus on the negatives rather than the very big positives that the project will bring the UK economy.
So the big positive is we get to Birmingham 25 minutes quicker?
I think the big positives are we build the capacity we need on the railways for the long-term future, and that will ensure that we can have a railway fit for the 21st century and that we can get around the country in a much better way than we do currently. We've had a very big success on our railways. We carry huge amounts of people on the railway, and we are absolutely now choking with capacity problems all over the network, and that's set to grow as a bigger problem as we go forward. And you know, what we do know is congestion costs money, and if you don't provide the right capacity, that costs money, costs the economy money. And I know £50 billion is a great deal of money, and we've got to make sure that we get value for that money. But when you compare it with the amount of money that other countries are spending in terms of their transport infrastructure, and in fact, you know, the amount of money that we're spending in London over the next 10 years is £80 billion on transport infrastructure. This is another much-needed transport infrastructure project that will actually bring huge benefit in terms of our economy.
All right,
the UK.
Just before I go to Richard Houghton, Mr. Inskip, how much quicker do we get to Birmingham as a result of HS2?
We get to Birmingham around about a half an hour quicker, and it's not all about speed, though. As I said before, it's actually about capacity. And if you're going to build a new railway line with new capacity, what you don't do is use old technology, clearly.
Okay.
What you do is use the most modern technology you can. So 21st century technology needed.
Richard Houghton, from the HS2 Action Alliance, you've got your head buried in the sand. You're like an ostrich. Progress has to happen. If people like you had been around 100 years ago, we would never have had the railway in the first place.
Of course not. No, it's an interesting little mantra, but it's not true, unfortunately. I mean, from our point of view, it's great news to see that at least some of the ministers are being honest and saying that in this case the Emperor really has no clothes on. Unfortunately, HS2 is a huge vanity project, and it becomes clear when you understand it's based on 4 big HS2 lies. The capacity argument, which is the latest of 4 that's been tuned out because it's been proved not to be green, the Green Party don't support it. The nonsense of the speed has been shown because it relied on people not working on trains, which of course we all know we do.
What, so it's not going to get to 30 minutes to Birmingham quicker?
But there's no real benefits on that when you look at the economic benefits. The wider economic benefits were so poor that the government had to throw £250,000 at KPMG to come up with a different report, which was then widely ridiculed because they had to change the methodologies from the DFT approach. And the capacity one is just not true. The government's own figures, we had ones out this week, show that intercity travel is flatlining. The big growth is in short commuter journeys, growing at about 5-6%. 80% of journeys in the UK are under 30 miles on trains. So the West Coast Main Line, London to Birmingham, at peak is at 55% capacity. That's the government's figures, and not ours. If you're going into Leeds, Manchester, Paddington, London Bridge, you've got trains running at over 90% capacity today. Now, let's think about it. HS2 doesn't stop between London and Birmingham, so it's not going to help those commuter routes. If the second phase is built, and let's remember the hybrid bill on Monday is only for phase 1, it'll only open up 1 or 2 train paths, so extra trains into Leeds and Manchester. It really is, frankly, built on sand, and you only have to see how the government has tried to stop people finding out the truth to see how desperate they are. You know, they refused to release the capacity figures for the West Coast Main Line till we took them to court. They used a veto last used for the Iraq War to stop the publication of the Major Projects Authority because it demonstrated that the organisation was in free fall and the budget was out of control. They don't mention that Euston is going to go to a weekend service for 8 to 10 years while they're building this, and we'll lose 5 platforms permanently. It simply isn't true that HS2 is the only solution to our problem. And lastly, I'd say, of course we must invest in infrastructure, but all of the previous reports before this little project got political support from people like Lord Adonis and George Osborne, had said you need to build the intra-regional infrastructure in the north and into Scotland before you connect any of those towns and cities to London, which, as we know, is an international city. It's not a UK city. It's 8-9 times bigger than Birmingham. It is going to suck all of the brightest and best into London, and it is going to mean that you can close down your regional offices, you can get there quicker. And anybody who thinks that HS2 is going to rebalance the economy is sadly mistaken.
Geoff Inskip, respond to some of that, if you wouldn't mind.
Yes. Well, I have to say that if we had all these some time ago about the Jubilee line in London, if you recall, many years ago when people sort of said, oh, what a waste of money, never be built, and look at it now, what a fabulous thing it was to build. We had the same argument.
It's closed down most weekends. Hang on, it's closed down most weekends for repairs.
But, you know,
and it's only been built 5 minutes. It's only been built 5 minutes.
You wouldn't have Docklands now, would you, being hugely successful?
It was privately built.
The London economy being you know, really being forced to create this transport infrastructure around London is much needed. Nobody actually argues about that. And this is HS2 is cross-rail for the North and the Midlands as well. It's the same sort of argument.
It is, it doesn't stop anywhere.
I can tell you this, in a few years' time, when it's built and it's up and running, all these other people who've been saying, you know, what a waste of money, etc., will be made to eat their words, absolutely, undoubtedly.
Simply not.
This is much needed, and the capacity arguments are very strong. And what you do get with a lot of people who are anti-HS2 is they sort of, we do need a high-speed rail, we do need the capacity, we just don't want this line.
All right, Mr. Inskip, Mr. You've had a good. Briefly, Richard, respond to Geoff Inskip.
Well, I think, you know, if you want to spend 50, and it's actually 72 billion from a report leaked by the Treasury, if you want to spend 72 billion, I want a little bit more detail than, trust me, it'll work. And the capacity arguments aren't strong. Your own figures show that you're about to put in another line alongside the least busy intercity line in the UK. Why would you do that? And why would you connect Birmingham, Manchester and Leeds to London, which is growing so much faster, and by the way, by your own reports, is going to be the biggest beneficiary, both in terms of jobs and economic growth from HS2. It simply makes no sense.
All right. Gentlemen, I've got to end it there. That's Geoff Inskip, who's the Chief Executive of Centro. That's the Transport Authority for the West Midlands. He's in favour. Against Richard Houghton from the HS2 Action Alliance. £50 billion. Richard Houghton says it'll be £72 billion. Do you know what I think? It'll be a disaster, because governments are useless at major capital build projects, whether it's an IT system or a rail system. And I know Geoff Inskip talked proudly of the Jubilee line. That's the shiny new silver London Underground service. Most weekends, it's closed completely for maintenance and repair. So why didn't they get it right the first time? I have absolutely no confidence in any government, Conservative, Liberal or Labour, in taking a project of this magnitude forward and delivering it on time or in budget.